All right. Well, okay, we are picking up tonight studying in preparation to move to the second half of Daniel and looking at apocalyptic literature, as it is called. So we're going to quickly run over some things we said last week to bring ourselves up to speed, and then we will progress forward. We talked about the fact that there are different types of literature in Scripture, and the way you study books depends upon what type of literature it is. And we know this instinctively. Even if we think, I don't know this technically, you do know it, right? The way you would read a love letter is very different than the way you'd read a court document. So we understand instinctively that there are different ways of reading certain types of literature, and apocalyptic is a type of literature, and there is a certain method to reading and discerning it, all right? Now, we talked then about the word apocalypse and how most of the times apocalypse is associated with end or end of the world. And we talked about the problem with that definition, okay? And the main problem with that definition is that's not at all what the word itself means. The word itself is the idea of disclosing, of revealing something. It's not about the end of anything. It's a compilation of a word and a prefix put together that mean basically to remove a covering or to remove a veil so that you can see something, okay? So we're having to, and as the guys at the Bible Project described this, and I think they do it helpfully, that it is when God pulls back the curtain to show someone what is going on from a divine perspective. And that is when you're in the midst, many times this literature prospers during times of persecution, and you can think that you're losing because it seems as if the side of evil is prospering and progressing forward, and sometimes we need to be reminded that that's not actually how it's going to work out. And apocalyptic literature does that. It reminds us how things are actually going to play out. So, as we think about it, its history, it was prominent for roughly 400 years, 200 BC to 200 AD. In that particular time period, apocalyptic literature prospered. It was obviously used before then. Daniel was written before then. Isaiah had portions of it. Zechariah had portions of it. But predominantly as a body of literature, it was there in that 400-year period. We need to understand that there is inspired apocalyptic literature, which we have for us in Scripture, and there are uninspired apocalyptic books, okay? The Bible does not use literary types that are peculiar to itself, okay? You can go to any culture and you're going to find poetry. The Bible uses poetic literature, so you're going to find it all across the board. Same is true with apocalyptic. You're going to see it. And so there are at least 14 Jewish apocalyptic books and at least 21 Christian apocalyptic books that are uninspired. That is, they were used to encourage Christians, but they weren't directly given under inspiration. So, as we think even more about this, we talked about some of the challenges that come along with interpreting this. The first one is the history, and the locations are different. We're dealing with a completely different time period, and we're dealing with a completely different part of the world than the one that we live in, okay? Now, if I'm going to travel overseas, I have to at least get myself ready, okay? If I'm just going to travel, I have to at least get myself ready to go into a different type of land, right? The language may not be the same. There may be shots I need to get. There may be cultural things I need to understand to make sure I'm not offensive when I go into that culture. And so we understand that instinctively, that when you deal with different cultures, you're dealing with differences. And we're dealing with, in apocalyptic literature, especially in Daniel, we're dealing with different cultures. We're dealing with different points in history. And those things have to be kept in mind if you're going to read the text as it's given to you in a way that is faithful to the way God intended it. So that's a challenge we have to overcome. Another challenge is unlearning the misunderstandings that people have put upon us, that we have absorbed through many times popular media and popular culture. So Let me bore you for a second with how information dispenses, okay? So, right now, premillennialism is probably the predominant theory that exists. If you go into mainline churches that consider themselves Christian, premillennialism is probably the predominant belief there. However, if you go into universities and into higher levels of education, premillennialism has been completely debunked and removed from the discussion. There are small pockets of it that still exist, but all in all, scholars have all but dismissed premillennialism. Okay? Now, let me explain how this works. So, first of all, I would also remind you of this. Only 15% of religious literature is available online, which is where most people are getting their religious information. Only 15% of the literature is there, and I can guarantee the 15% that is there is not the type that you want to grab. Okay? So, people say, why, if the individuals who are educating preachers, why, if they have rejected premillennialism, why is it still so predominant? Well, this is how it works. So, if you're going to challenge premillennialism in the academy, that is, in institutions of higher learning, you're going to have to write and develop an academic theory. And in that theory, you're going to have to go to a society of learning and present your theory. Okay? And in that theory, you will have other scholars who are in the room with you, and they will give you pointers. Okay? They will talk to you about good things you said, things that you need to think through more, things that challenge your thoughts a little bit. And then after that, which, by the way, getting that process going is about an 18-month process. After that, then you will take it and you will actually write the academic article itself. Now, when that is done, you have to get it in publication. And to get that published, I promise you I'm going somewhere with this. To get that published, you have to wait until a journal decides to pick it up and when they can fit it in their outgoing issues, which many of them are only quarterly. So it might be a year or two waiting to get your academic article published. And when it is published, it has to be peer reviewed, which means they will send it to scholars in those particular areas, and they will write reviews of it, and those will be discussed in an open forum. So that takes about another year or two. Then, if you're lucky, they will take a snippet of it and they will insert it into an encyclopedia, a biblical encyclopedia. And then, after that, it might find its way into a commentary somewhere. You see the point I'm trying to make here? What we hold, when we hold a religious book in our hands, it is containing theory that's at least 10 years in the making. There is almost a 10-year lag from the time of your research to the time where people actually get it in their hands. So the academy has all but rejected the premillennialist view of how the world will end. But there's a lag. It takes time for literature to catch up. It takes time for churches to catch up. Because even if they teach their students that premillennialism is not accurate, they're still going into churches where premillennialism has been taught. And if you want to keep your job, you got to figure out how to do that without losing your job, to explain to them that what they had been taught was not correct. Eventually, the premillennial ideas are going to die down. It's just the nature of things. Okay? But right now, it is predominant. It is in mainstream media. And that's why a great deal of people have trouble with apocalyptic literature, because the only thing they've ever heard about it is the fantastic stuff that exists. Okay? Your average person isn't going to go to a religious academic journal and say, let me read the latest cutting-edge research on eschatology. That's not going to happen. Okay? So this will come around. And the point is that many times we have to challenge and unlearn the things we have picked up, not even realizing it. Such as apocalypse, and we talk about apocalyptic movies or a post-apocalyptic set or a setting of a movie. That's because we're still associating apocalypse with end times. But apocalypse is not associated with end times. Okay? Apocalypse is associated with difficult times and revealing during those difficult times. The third challenge that we have to overcome is this: trying to make everything about you and the time in which you live. And when you study the history of interpretation, you will see that people have a tendency to take apocalyptic literature and to demonize whoever the person is that's giving them trouble. For many people, it was the Catholic Church in certain portions during the Reformation movement. Everything apocalyptic in Revelation was talking about the Catholic Church and the Pope. Other times, even right now, it's political leaders. This person is this and this person is that. And that's a mistake. Okay? And we'll get into that a little bit more tonight when we talk about the characteristics and the process of interpreting it. But we have to avoid, when Daniel sat down and God revealed to him these visions and he sat down to write them, he was not thinking about 21st century America when he wrote it. He was thinking about Israelites in Babylonian captivity. Okay? Now, if I forget that, I'm going to come up with some interpretations that are wild. Okay? And that's not in any way to be disrespectful to those who would come up with those interpretations. It's just simply a point of fact. All right? So we got to talking about some of the characteristics of apocalyptic literature, the first of which, it always has historical significance. It's always during times of great distress and difficulty in which God communicates these particular messages, and even when other people write it or use this literary form. There's also the use of visions, okay? Daniel chapter 7, we're introduced to a vision. Let's see, Daniel 7, 1 and 2. He says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea." So you see, he's seeing a vision. He's calling that. Now, if you look over in chapter 9, beginning in verse 20, you can find that angels were sometimes involved in these visions. This is his view of the 70 weeks. In verse 20, it says, "While I was speaking," this is Daniel speaking, "while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God for the holy hill of my God, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in a vision at the first, came to me in swift flight at the time of the evening sacrifice. He made me understand, speaking with me and saying, 'O Daniel, I have come out to give you insight and understanding. At the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out that I should come and tell it to you, for you are greatly loved. Therefore, consider the word and understand the vision.'" And so God dispatches an angel to help Daniel understand the vision that he's having. Okay? And so there is the use of visions. Okay? And with a vision, when you see the way visions work, it's like a play. It's like you're sitting here in the audience and someone is up on a stage and something is happening in front of you. You're watching it transpire, okay? So think of it along the lines of a theatrical production, okay? A theatrical production is going on in front of us, and we're discerning what is being communicated in the theatrical production. And many times it's silent theater. They're not actually speaking particular words, okay? So we have to try and discern from the images. All right. Then there's the use of dramatic elements. And we talked about this last week, that forceful symbols, teaching by symbols and crazy images has a way of sticking with you, right? And so I may not be able to remember the 3 points that somebody lists in a lecture, But if they give this crazy illustration and then tie their 3 points into that crazy illustration, I might remember the crazy illustration, and that might enable me to remember the points a little bit better. So that's why we have these dramatic elements. All right. Next, there's going to be the use of symbols. Okay? And we'll talk about this more in a little bit. So for an example, just think about numbers for a minute. Numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? Think about numbers like 7, 10, 12, 40, 100, or multiples like 1,000 or 12,000 or 144,000. These are symbolic in their nature, okay? 7 is considered to be a complete number. That's seen throughout Scripture. That's almost an unargued point by anybody. Part of that being because the creation week is 7 days. There's that idea of a completion, of a unit. The number 10 is also seen as kind of a good round number, okay? For an example, in Revelation 2, when he tells the church that they're going to have tribulation 10 days, he's not clocking them and saying it's going to be 10 days exactly. It's just a way of saying something is 10 times better, okay? It's symbolic. It's not to be taken literally. Or if you look at something like 1,000, okay? A lot of people, and we'll talk about this image a little bit later, but a lot of people take the number 1,000, they want to treat it literally, okay? But you have to be careful here. In Psalm 50, the Lord says to the people of Israel, I don't need your sacrifices. It's not like I need them to eat to fill my stomach. He said, if I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you. All the cattle of the earth is mine, and the beasts upon 1,000 hills. Is he being literal? Is God saying, I own literally 1,000 hills? Or is the 1,000 hills a way of saying, they're all mine? So we understand this even in the way we communicate. And if we lose that understanding and start trying to go literal and forcing things, we're going to run into problems. We're going to force language further than it's ever intended to go. And that's one of the things that is talked about here. For an example, in Revelation, we won't look at these, but beginning in Revelation 8:6, when the revelation is given, there are the 7 trumpets who are blown. Before that, there are 7 seals, and then there are 7 trumpets. And then later after that, there are 7 bowls of wrath that are poured out. The trumpet, he's not showing a picture that one day, one angel is going to blow his trumpet, and then this is going to happen, and then the next day at the end times, an angel is going to blow his trumpet, and this is going to... That's not his point, okay? The trumpet was the symbol of grabbing attention. Numbers 10, 1 through 10, gives you several different purposes of a trumpet. Okay? So the trumpet was calling attention. Many times a sign to a symbol for war, and then the call to attack. Okay? So, in that particular context of the 7 trumpets, it's a reincarnation, so to speak, of the Exodus plagues being poured out on the nation of Rome. God is going to systematically dismantle them the way that he dismantled the Egyptians. The trumpet we aren't supposed to picture an angel literally blowing a trumpet. That's not the idea. It's symbolic. Okay? And on we could go. Now, while apocalypses do not deal with end times, they do have an emphasis on future events. Okay? Especially because they're written during times of persecution. How is the current situation going to work itself out? Okay? In Daniel, they're going to be concerned with, they're still in captivity. How is that going to work out? Are we going to stay here forever? Are we going to get out? Then after we get out, if we do get out, what's going to happen? That's what he's dealing with. Okay? Next. It is characterized by conflict, always. Stay here in chapter 7 for just a moment. Chapter 7, verses 4 and 5. Just see, these are a couple of the beasts that come up out of the waters. It says, "The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then I looked, and its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one like a bear. It was raised up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, 'Arise, devour much flesh.'" And so there's a constant, when we go into chapter 8, we're going to have a ram and a he-goat who start butting heads with each other. Look at probably the most famous of these, Revelation 16 for just a second. This is the angels pouring out their bowls of wrath, okay? It says, "So the 6th angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and the water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings of the east. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. They are demonic spirits performing signs who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle and on the great day of God the Almighty. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeping his garments on, that he may not go about naked and be seen exposed." Verse 16, "And they shall assemble them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon." And so the Battle of Armageddon is one that has received a great deal of attention. And it comes from this text. Now, when we get to some of these interpretive rules, we're going to see why that's a very mistaken idea. But you remember, we studied kings before Daniel. Another name for Armageddon is Megiddo. And when we were in the Kings, we constantly read about conflicts that took place on the plain of Megiddo. It was a common battlefield. Okay? Now, John is writing in apocalyptic symbolic language, and he's drawing back on our understanding of what the Old Testament taught us and the history that we understand of the Old Testament. On the plains of Megiddo, what happened? There were battles there all the time. He's not talking about a battle that's going to take place, a great apocalyptic battle that's going to take place at the end of time. He's talking about a battle that already exists. He's just simply, for an example, maybe an organization or a church is facing a difficult moment, and we might say, this is for that organization or for that church, this is their D-Day. What do we mean by that? That this place is literally about to go to Normandy and try and storm the beaches? Or do we mean that just as D-Day was kind of the moment that changed this tide of World War II, how this particular organization or church responds to this moment will determine their future? So we're using it in a symbolic way. Okay? And so with a lot of this, it's really about thinking how we use language and understanding how to do that correctly. Because human communication is pretty similar throughout the ages. So it is in these books characterized conflict between good and evil as it is set forward. Further, it has an emphasis on martyrdom. Okay, for an example, Daniel 7 and verse 25. It is speaking of one of the individuals from the 4th beast, and it says, "He shall speak words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High." Wear them out. He's going to persecute them. Okay? The same thing is true, Revelation 2 and verse 13. Antipas, my faithful witness. The Greek term there is the word from which we get our English word martyr. And so martyr, that he was killed for his faith. And so there's an emphasis upon martyrdom and on dying for the cause of right and the cause of God, which is problematic with some people's interpretation of apocalyptic literature. Some people's interpretation of books like this are that God rescues his people and does not allow them to be harmed. The only problem is these books always talk about how people die on behalf of God. Okay? And so when we're analyzing interpretations of things, we have to ask ourselves, okay, that sounds good, but is it consistent with what I actually see in front of me? And if I have a view that says God is going to rescue a certain amount of us and we're not going to be harmed and we're not going to be touched by persecution, something tells me I'm not reading it correctly. Because all throughout this book, in Revelation alone, if you were to read it in its original language, you would see the term martyr over and over and over and over and over. People who are dying, okay? Not escaping it, but people who are being killed in the midst of it. And so any interpretation that tells me that that's not going to happen should probably cause me to sit up and go, maybe I think they might be missing something, okay? Next, that is, the one receiving the vision would also interact with the vision. For an example, in Revelation chapter 4, John is being given the revelation, and all of a sudden he sees a door in heaven opened. Okay? And a voice saying, "Come up here and I will show you things that are to take place later." And so, as we said last week, it's not just about watching theater, it's about interactive theater, where they bring you into the story and you interact. In Revelation 5, one of the angels that's walking John through this revelation, that is, in this particular image, God is on the throne and he has the document with the seals on it in his hand, and no one is found worthy to take that from his hand, the hand of God the Father. And so the angel looks at him and says, basically, what's going to happen here? Everybody starts weeping, and the angel looks at him and says, "Don't weep, there's the lamb, and he's going to take it from his hand." You see the conversation that's taking place between the angel, who is kind of his escort, and John. They're interacting with what they're seeing. Okay? So that's something that's going to be key to understanding. And then finally, and I say finally, of the ones we're going to look at, there's a lot more. The person receiving the revelation is worn out by it. Okay? Daniel, in Daniel 8:18 and Daniel 10:8 and 9, he just passes smooth out. It is so overwhelming what he's seeing, it just knocks him out. When John sees the glorified Christ in front of him in Revelation 1, he says, "I fell down like a dead man." Okay? So, those are some characteristics of it, and some of those will become a little more. I just want us to be exposed to them. As we watch it unfold, you'll start to see some of these things come to the forefront, so at least we'll have a guide to walk with us. Very quickly, when it comes to interpreting this type of literature, there needs to be caution and reserve. Okay? Anyone who comes along and says, "I know exactly what all these symbols mean," you need to back away very slowly. Because nobody knows what they all mean. There has to be a sense. There are interpretations that I believe I can rule out and say, no, that can't be what is meant. I think I can do that. And I think that there are interpretations that I can feel very confident in. I'm pretty sure this is what he means. But the person who thinks that they have got all of these things figured out, that's something that's problematic to me. And then, and I know the bell rang, but I'm going to steal a minute or two. Allow the picture to settle in your mind. So this is what happens with a lot of people when they read apocalyptic literature. They look at it and they're like, what in the world is happening? And so they read one verse and it's like, whoa. And then they stop. Here's the thing. When a movie is played in front of you, Do you spend the whole movie with the remote pausing it and analyzing every scene? I hope not. He's not meaning for us to interpret every single little thing. Okay? So if you read it and get the whole image in your head, get the picture in your head first, then you start from there. You don't say, I'm going to read verse 1 until I figure out verse 1, I'm not reading verse 2. That's not how this works. You read the paragraph. You read the fullness of the vision, and then you start piecing your vision together. Okay? And then the last one before we're done here is this. So when we're studying the Bible on the whole, we assume that the language is literal, right? The same way when you and I are having a conversation, you assume that I'm telling you something that is true, that I'm not metaphorically speaking or using some kind of hyperbole. I'm just speaking to you, and I mean what I say. I'm not like, I'd say to you, I went to McDonald's for supper. That's not like some mystical meaning of, oh, what did he really mean? What does it mean that he went? And what is McDonald's? And what does that stand for? What does the Golden Arch stand for? You don't do that. You assume it means he went to McDonald's. Okay. Now in apocalyptic literature, it's just the opposite. You assume that it is figurative because that's its nature. You see, in regular speech, we assume something is literal until we're given reason to believe we should take it figuratively. In apocalyptic, you assume it is figurative until you're given reason to believe that you should take it literally. Okay? It's just the nature of it because it used so many symbols. So, we will pause there and finish this up next week and move into chapter 7 and kind of see how it starts working a little bit.